And so, it begins. Dark were the skies and chill was the wind as the land was covered in a veil of malice. Across the hill did ride a dread army of the night, cloaked in mist and fog, prepared to rain down death and destruction upon the land. And the people did crowd for a savior, a noble soul to save them from their impending demise. Just as it seemed all was lost, in strode a mighty hero, clad in shivering metal from head to toe. Wielding a terrible broadsword, he did cleave his foes in two, smashing their ranks asunder with righteous fury. And when the day was done and the enemy strewn across the fields in pieces, the people did turn to the warrior and say, "We shall name this day in your honor. Speak unto us your wisdom." The warrior said one word that day: epic.
One man, one Murloc, one giant angry badger. This is Blue Please. It begins now. Yes, indeed, folks. Welcome to Blue Please here on WoW Radio with myself, TotalBiscuit. The date today is the 30th of January 2009. It is 8 o'clock in the British Isles. It is other times in other places. And you are listening to the most shockingly grim show. Yes, I've been accused of being a little bit of a shock jock. Some guy actually compared me to Rush Limbaugh, of all people. And it's like, well, as far as I'm aware, I'm not a closet homophobic racist who wishes to destroy America. But, whatever. At least he's popular, I suppose, so, I can have that as a plus. What do we got coming up in the show today? Well, we're going to be doing a retrospective of sorts. We're going to be delving into the Burning Crusade. Yes, the previous expansion. And we're going to be looking at why it was maligned, and what it did right and what it did wrong, and the things which led into the creation of Wrath of the Lich King in its current form, which, as you're probably well aware by this point, I despise with a fiery passion. Yes, indeed. We'll also be looking at what we're going to need from the next expansion, what Blizzard has to learn from the experiences of TBC and Wrath of the Lich King, and going forward, hopefully making some kind of experience which does not involve raid content that can be cleared in 3 days after release. Yes, indeed. And of course, the one and only Illusion of Choice! Yes, you'll get your chance to submit the final topic for the show, and you can do so by emailing themurloc@gmail.com. Email in your Illusion of Choice topic, and it may or may not get used. Now, throughout the show, I will be soliciting emails from you guys. Normally, I don't usually do this, but in this case, I am going to do it. I'm going to let you email me in. It's going to be a constant running topic. The retrospective is definitely going to be going on for at least 2 talkie segments, which is more than most, because most only take 1 talkie segment. So you can email in at murloc@gmail.com regarding your thoughts on the TBC. Did you like it? Did you hate it? What did you like? What didn't you like? We'll weave them into the discussion like some grand tapestry of sorts. Now, however, we must, of course, open up with the feature that we brought back, which involves this.
That sounds like it's mail time. Here's the mail.
Oh, it never fails.
It makes me want to wag my tail. When it comes,
I want to wail.
Quite, indeed. It is the time when I read your mail, of which you have sent some, and some of it is actually quite good. So we're going to start off with this. This is an article that I do quite like. Unfortunately, the person who sent it to me did link it on Massively, which was a silly idea, because all Massively does is regurgitate other people's good content and write fluff around it. However, it's okay, because I have the original link here. Now, this was submitted to me by Boss Wally, and he has an email to accompany it, and I shall read that email for you, just to preface what he has to say. At least when I can find the email, which I have inexplicably lost. There it is. Right. Okay, we're good. And it says, "Hey TB, I found this article on Massively. Stop reading Massively. Read good blogs. Go and read Gamers with Jobs. Go and read the escapist stuff, you know. That's where the material actually comes from." And he says, "I finally found out what the casuals' agenda is." And this article says this. This is by Sean Sands, and he runs a website, I believe, or at least he is part of a website, called Gamers with Jobs, which is a blog about, well, gaming for those who have jobs and busy lives, etc. So it's kind of like a blog for casuals. By the definition of casual, I mean not the derogatory definition of casual, the actual proper definition of a casual player. And to say this, he says, "Go ahead, you can blame me, just to be sure and spread that blame a little thin, because you've got about 10 million people right behind me who screwed it all up just as bad. You see, once upon a time, there were MMOs who put hair on your chest, which is perhaps why men became the stereotypical player. Venturing down the virtual road to the local merchant was itself a quest of great peril, and the cobblestone 2D roads of early MMOs proved rife with legitimate and aptly named highway robbery. Gangs of villains, the diabolical avatars of endlessly repressed rage, roamed the streets with impunity, their vengeance striking indiscriminately and without warning." And it goes on. And basically, he goes on to talk about World of Warcraft being, you know, possibly the most casually friendly MMO to come along, and of course it did. Unfortunately, there is something of an issue. And he says this: "The most recent expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, is a triumph in virtually every way. Provides a landmass rich with content, and even more surprisingly, an epic storyline that embraces a rich and professionally crafted history. As a player, you are asked to face the monstrous forces that can destroy worlds. Unfortunately, the law of the land is no geek left behind." Yes, indeed. Now, his point, just to kind of break it down a little bit, is with Wrath, and this is something that I've said, and I'm glad to see that someone else is getting it, especially from the casual perspective, because a lot of people do view my views as elitist, and I would agree, they're absolutely elitist, because I'm one of the better players in the game, and I have no problem admitting that. There's a lot of very good players. The problem is, being good in WoW is entirely relative. It's being better than the rest of the idiots, and really that doesn't take a lot. To be better than 90% of the player base, all you need to do is know what your hotkeys are, how to press them in the right order, and the ability not to stand in the fire. Also, basic scheduling skills and priorities do help, and also the ability to communicate without using the words roffalol at regular intervals. These are all useful skills that make you the elite of WoW. Yes, it's that bad. I'm called elitist, and my response to that is simply this: in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. WoW players in general, on average, suck. So, being good in comparison to them is incredibly easy. Now, this no geek left behind policy, appealing, pandering to a casual player base to the point where actually they've gone too far. Now, I do not mind Blizzard putting in content that is suitable for casual players, as long as we get, in our minds, a solid definition of what casual actually means. To me, casual means limited time. It means that you want, you're not so much unskilled, you're not worse at the game than other people, you just have a lot of RL priorities that get in the way of playing on a regular basis. Either that, or they get in the way of playing for a long time. Now, anything that gets in the way of playing on a regular basis can be problematic, because, of course, it gets in the way of joining raiding guilds. However, and this has been around for a very, very long time, and TBC introduced this mostly, is that there are a lot of guilds who are designed around short-form raiding schedules, i.e., that do not take a massive amount of your time. Sure, they might not progress as far as the other guilds, the guilds that spend more time in there, but they do raid, and they raid regularly, and they generally raid well. They might not raid as well as the Bleeding Edge, but they certainly raid well, and as a member of one of these guilds, you can experience the vast majority of content, as well as raiding with people who are like you and understand your situation, which I think is very important. Looking at WoW from a social perspective, you do want to be with a group of people that can empathise with your particular RL commitments and work around them. Now, to me, that's what a casual is. That's my idea of a casual. That's the kind of casual that Gnomewise and his crew are. They can't log in for massive amounts of time, but when they do log in, they make it quality time. Maybe they've got the weekends so maybe they raid on the weekends. And other times, if they do have the time, they might jump into a random pug, or they'll just maybe do a heroic in half an hour or whatever. And they will gain gear, and they will progress, albeit at a slower pace than other people, but they will progress. And that's fine. I have nothing but time for those people. I do not mind them at all, and I have a lot of respect for people that play that way. However, the problem is there's another kind of casual, and we like to call them the entitled casual. These are generally the people who aren't actually casual at all. They are entitled casuals. They are people who want everything they possibly can from the game and don't want to work for it. And Blizzard seems to have catered to them. Now here's the problem. Hard content does not mean it's unfriendly to casuals. You can have an uber hard instance that takes half an hour to finish. Now, are you telling me that that's unfriendly to casuals? Because if you are, then that means you're telling me that casual players are not as good as other players. Now, since WoW has a very low skill threshold, and the skill involved in playing WoW does not tie in at all to the amount of time you spend playing the game, since you should be able to learn your class quite easily while leveling up, it's not really all that hard, then you are admitting that casual players suck in comparison to normal players. Now, since most entitled casuals, when they make their long, whining, pointless rhetoric on the forums, tend to say, oh, well, I'm a casual player, and I'm just as good as everyone else, but I want this, and I can't do this. I can't raid because I have a life. Well, the argument must be made that Insidia raids less than everyone else because they're better at the game. They spend less time in-game because they are better at it, and they can finish all the content quicker. And that actually has always been the way. The people who spend the most time in the game are the people who are wiping a lot. This is especially true with Wrath, because most people can clear the content in just a few short hours. Nax can be cleared by any average guild, indeed also a pug that at least knows what it's doing, in about 4 hours. Whether that be the 10-man or 25-man version. Sartharian is a 10-minute kill, Malagos is a 10-minute kill, and VOA is also a 10-minute kill. So if you were to dedicate 5 hours, you could do the whole lot in one night. Alternatively, you could spread it over several days. Bearing in mind, of course, Nax is a winged instance, and each wing takes between 45 minutes to 1 hour. There is no excuse. Not anymore. Not for people that say, oh, I have a life, and you shouldn't be catering to these poop suckers, you should be catering to me. Well, actually, they did cater to you, and the problem is they catered far too much. They made the content so easy that even casuals are saying, well, what's next? And that's something that they've never really had. I've been a casual every now and again when I've had a very, very busy life. Heck, I have a very busy life now. And you could consider my playtime to be of a casual level. However, I do schedule my time around things that I care about, like WoW Radio, like my job, like my wife, like my family, and like WoW. You know, these are the things that I like. So, am I a casual player or am I a hardcore player? I certainly play hard when I get in game. I try to focus as much as I can. I'm a very experienced raider. My gear is certainly above par. And I do very, very, very good DPS, so one could say that my job is being fulfilled in the manner of a hardcore player. And I have no problems working for things, as long as they're enjoyable. Now, there's things like daily quests. I don't actually do those, which is amusing, actually, because daily quests are considered to be casual-friendly. Yet, it seems to me that daily quests are the kind of things that only the hardcore player would actually dedicate themselves to doing on a daily basis, unlike people really like repetition. And I can't really understand that, because I do not like repetition, which is the reason I don't do dailies. It's no fun. It's like having a second job. And again, there's a bunch of irony there, because entitled casuals post on the forums, well, I have a real job, I don't want a second job. Yeah, but you do your dailies every day, don't you? Anyway, that's kind of straying from the point. The point is that there was so much whining, and there was so much entitlement. You know, complexes of entitlement a mile wide. Posted on the forums over and over and over again. And so many people indeed complaining that TBC was too hard. That the content got nerfed into the ground. And look, hey, they nerfed it too far. What a shocker. Of course they nerfed it too far. Now, the fact of the matter is that as a casual player and as a hardcore player, in my opinion, the only right you have is the ability to test yourself against the same content as everybody else. And that might involve some progression. In the case of Wrath, it doesn't. Now, they removed attunements. Good thing. As far as I'm concerned, if all of the doors are unlocked and thrown open to you, then the only thing that you should have to worry about is the ability to walk through them. Are you good enough to step across the threshold? Because it's down purely to the skill of you and the skill of your raiding group. Now, to me, that seems like the perfect balance. It's not getting in the way of casual players. You've got instances which are relatively short and are winged. They have nice, long reset timers and can be done at your leisure very easily. You have a lot of gear that can be acquired to help you out through the running of heroic dungeons, which, again, I have no issue with. I just wish they were somewhat harder, because right now heroics are about the same difficulty level as everything else, i.e. not at all. But the problem is, it's now all too easy. And as this guy so aptly points out, he ruined World of Warcraft, and he didn't, right? He didn't ruin it, but there are plenty of people that have certainly contributed, said, hey, the raids are too hard, and gave the impression that, no, casuals cannot do this. No, casuals can. Real casual players, yes, they can. Certainly with Wrath. Indeed, pre-Wrath they could as well. Without a doubt. They might not have got as far as other people, but the problem is the expectation that you as a person who plays less should get the same as somebody who plays more, which is not a solid grasp of reality. That's not how it works. Whether it be in game or whether it be in real life, the only thing that you should have that is equal to everybody else is the opportunity to try. And I have no problems with that. Bring it on. Take all achievements away, let anyone walk through the door, and let's see what happens. Let them test themselves against the content. But don't let them walk through it. Don't drown them in epics, and don't take away from the raiding experience. You might have a job, you might have a career, you might have priorities, you might have a family. A lot of us do. Get that into your head. You are not some treasured minority. The vast majority, in my opinion, are casual players, and there's an awful lot of them who are raiding. And continue to raid, and raided before Wrath. And they didn't complain, and they didn't whine, and they just got on with it. They toughed it out, and they were rewarded. And that's how it should be. My name is TotalBiscuit, you are listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. I'll be right back after this. It's Curasass as torches rise. Enjoy. You are listening to the podcast and archive of Blue Please. Music was removed due to copyright concerns. If you'd like to hear the music, tune in live on Fridays at 8 PM British Standard Time. That is 3 PM EST on WCRadio.com. Let's face it, everywhere you go, you see adverts for Ventrilo server providers. With so many to choose from, how do you make the decision about which is right for you and your guild? To help you with the decision, we brought in WoW Radio's very own bleeding-edge hardcore raiders to show you which provider the world's top players trust.
Loot the stupid car hound!
No. Tank it over there! You're setting the raid on fire!
Someone pulled ads, guys!
Oh, for God's sakes! Heal the tank! Heal the tank!
Hey guys, it's okay to DI the tank, right?
Why are you smiting and not healing?
Is that a halibut? Are you DPSing with a halibut?
Leave George alone! You'll hurt his feelings!
You named that halibut?
Guys, I think we're wiping.
What gave you that idea?
Well, we're all standing in the graveyard arguing. UGT Ventrilo servers, the only choice for the elite of the elite. Hi, I'm TotalBiscuit, the best and sexiest mage on the planet. When you're like me, you don't have downtime between raids and promotional photo shoots. That's why I use UGT Ventrilo servers. I don't have to get my hands dirty trying to fix a broken server, because it was never broken to begin with. UGT servers provide crystal clear voice communication with excellent hands-on support to make sure your server is always up and running. Not only that, their prices are so low, I was able to use the extra money to buy this £32 salmon. What, you didn't think I was going to be outdone by Dustin, did you? Hey guys, want to run some BRD? Get your premium quality Ventrilo server from UGTservers.com. Be the best. Well, second best. Yes, indeed, folks. You listen to Blue Please here on WoW Radio with myself, TotalBiscuit. Now, today's topic, the big meaty thing. Yeah, that sounds incredibly dodgy. Between the two bonds of mail time and illusion of choice is the Burning Crusade. Now, why am I talking about the Burning Crusade? Is this not perhaps the most irrelevant content you can imagine? Well, no. Because you have to always look behind you at where you've been to know exactly where you are. Unless you have the Nokia E71 with its inbuilt GPS, in which case I can just press a few buttons and know exactly where I am within 10 feet. However, since most people do not own the fancy G71 GPS phone, they may own other phones with GPS, but I can guarantee that it won't be quite as good. We will have to look behind us. Now, the TBC was actually, for some inexplicable reason, why did I just say the TBC? The Burning Crusade. There, we'll just go with the Burning Crusade from here on in. The Burning Crusade has been much maligned, I must say, and I believe unfairly. It was, of course, the first expansion of WoW, and it had a lot to prove. And I believe that it actually did an awful lot of things right. And in the first segment, we're going to be talking about the content that is not raiding. Because, as you're well aware, all I really care about is raiding, and that's the big meat of the endgame content. But for our first retrospective segment, we'll be talking about all manner of things like leveling, storytelling, crafting, and all manner of things like that, as well as the dungeons leading up to level 70. Now, you can email in on this topic. Yes, I will allow you to do so. It's themurloc@gmail.com. Email themurloc@gmail.com with your comments on the Burning Crusade. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Why? Why not? Indeed. Now, let's kick off with the leveling, because of course that's the most relevant thing if you're starting off with an expansion. And we're going to do a direct comparison between the Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King. Now, I do believe, and I think this is pretty much a universal truth, I haven't seen anyone that disagrees with this, that the Wrath leveling is vastly superior to the Burning Crusade. However, the Burning Crusade leveling was also vastly superior to the original game. It was a jump. Now, of course, we've got to look at why it was a jump. Well, let's look first at TBC over the original WoW. Now, since the Burning Crusade was a more compact experience than the original sprawling 1-60 grind, you would think that there would be a lot more properly linked storytelling. It would be clear as to where you have to go next. Now, that wasn't really necessarily the case. You did have a little bit of choice, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but most of the areas led onto each other in a logical way. Now, as regards to the questing itself, the quest chains were generally about as long. There was quite a few multi-person quests. In fact, this actually happened an awful lot. At the end of a lot of longer quest chains, you might either have a dungeon, or you might end up with a multi-person quest that could not be completed solo unless you were incredibly imbalanced at the time. Now, whether or not that was a good thing is debatable, but it has continued somewhat, although to a lesser degree, I would say. Definitely to a lesser degree in Wrath. Some people think this is a good idea. It brings the culmination and the closing of a particular thread of the story with a suitably epic battle. Yes, I did just say epic. Indeed. Some people don't believe it's a good idea because some people think that leveling should be doable solo, and that denying the best leveling rewards to people who are soloing by putting in a multi-person quest and forcing them to go with the other people, yes, I might catch a disease, is unfair. Now, I don't know, I've always faced the problem, because I'm a very slow leveler. I'm not very good at it, I'm afraid. I've always faced the issue of being behind my guildies. So what generally happens is that, since they're leveling and very busy with their other stuff, I'll end up at the end of a quest chain, find a quest that I cannot solo, and have to do it with pubbies. And sometimes that doesn't work out so well, because I'm generally behind the curve. Sometimes I will manage to get a puppy, sometimes I won't. So I understand the frustration, but I do still believe that culminating quests with an epic final battle, which generally involves more than one person, is a good idea. Because the risk matches the reward, and the amount of people and effort you have to put into it should lead on to a nice culmination of the quest, the apex of the quest, and hopefully the best reward possible. Now, Wrath didn't do that so much. Wrath made these quests more solo-friendly. There were still a few, and indeed there are quite a few, although what I have noticed is that a lot of the multi-person quests are actually separate. They're not the final quest in a long chain. A lot of the final quests in a long chain can actually be done solo and are done in a relatively creative fashion. So we've got things like the Zul'Drak quest, where you have to go through this entire line of quests convincing them that you are a ghoul and a suitable lieutenant for their evil machinations, and you go through all manner of things, and at the end of it, you deceive the boss troll, and you fight him solo. And you do so by using a rod of control to control various minions. So it's like a one-person instance. It's like it understands that there is no way that you could possibly defeat this person solo, and it would be trivial. It would be absolutely trivial for you to just sit there and DPS him down. Plus, of course, it means that certain classes don't do it as well as others. Now, by adding in these elements, you get to a situation where classes all become equal, and you can have a suitably epic encounter without the hassle of having to get other people in there. And a lot of it is very fun. I actually do enjoy the solo stuff because it is challenging. A lot of these fights have various different mechanics that take a little bit of time to master, and sometimes you screw up. Now, of course, what a lot of people will realize is that this was actually brought in with TBC. It wasn't brought in with Wrath. Indeed, if you remember, there is... I can't remember the name of the quest, but it's a daily quest that is linked to the Apexis shards. And what you can do is you can do this daily quest in Blade's Edge Mountains, and you control various minions, and there are good rewards to be had, but it is a very challenging quest. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of practice to get it right. Now, in my opinion, I would imagine that that was a prototype for this system, and it seemed to work pretty well. TBC didn't have that before that. That was actually introduced after the launch of TBC. All of these daily quests and the spicing up of that particular area was introduced after the Burning Crusade launch in a patch a lot later on. There were no daily quests to begin with. Now, as regards to the itemization of the quest items, you've got to think that the itemization on Burning Crusade loot was vastly superior to the original game. It really was. It was designed around being able to replace the gear that you had, and indeed quite early. Now, some people didn't view that as a good thing, because they thought, well, why should my Tier 2.5 and Tier 3 and Tier 2 and good items from Blackwing Lair be replaced with greens? It looks silly, and I feel like my experience was devalued. Other people said, well, this is a good idea, because it helps level the playing field, and getting new gear is exciting. You don't want to be stuck in your old gear. Now, Wrath, of course, struck a balance between the two, and I must say that looking back at it, I probably prefer the TBC system. I think they went a little bit too far with Wrath, and indeed I wasn't replacing any of my items save my trinkets until at least level 77. All of my stuff was reasonably good Tier 5 or higher level gear, and I wasn't replacing it until then. Now, to be honest, I would prefer that I was replacing it bit by bit across the levels. And in TBC, I did do that. I had some Blackwing Lair level gear, I had some Molten Core gear, I had some AQ40 gear, I had some Nax gear, and I replaced it piece by piece over the course of several levels. Now, some people view that as a bad thing, but bear this in mind. If I was wearing Tier 5, and when I hit 80, I replaced, instantly, 6 pieces of gear. Now, what did I replace them with? Crafted PvP blues. Now, what's worse? Replacing items piecemeal with greens, and getting several upgrades on your way to 70, or waiting until level 80 and then replacing all of your stuff with crafted PvP items. What's worse? Well, I actually view the whole level 80 thing as the worst option. It was way worse. And looking back at TBC, in retrospect, I would say that they pretty much got it right. Maybe they overdid it slightly. They could have bumped everything up a level the other way. But it was exciting to get new gear, don't get me wrong, and because the gear was so different and had different stats and had vastly superior statistics indeed, it was still exciting to get, even if it looked terrible. So that wasn't too shabby at all. Now, of course, we're going to also look at the crafting of TBC versus the crafting of Wrath. Now, the issue that I have with the crafting of Wrath, and I've said this before, is that there is a lack of diversity. Now, in TBC, they realised that crafting was broken, and it was. Most crafting was worthless. It could be outdone by questing gear, it could be outdone by leveling gear, it could be outdone by raiding gear, of course, and only the occasional item was useful. And as regards to making money, it was a complete waste of time. You could not make money via crafting at all, unless you had a very rare recipe. And of course, coming towards the end of the original game before the first expansion, there wasn't an awful lot of people that had rare recipes versus other people that didn't. I mean, you're looking at a situation where a rare recipe would be owned by, say, 25, 30 plus people on the server and would no longer be rare. So you couldn't demand ridiculous fees because there would be competition. So you might as well just be selling your leveling stuff. I mean, really. Just sell mithril bombs or ore or whatever. The gathering professions were all that was worthwhile. That had to change. Now, it wasn't changed by making crafting more useful as regards to selling items. No, it wasn't. Jewel crafting came in, and that could sell. Absolutely. That was the big selling profession. But with other professions, it didn't actually happen. What they did was they turned it inwards. They noticed the profession of engineering, for instance. Engineering was a terrible seller, but it had items that could buff you, and they were unique to you. So they decided, hey, we're going to expand that, and we're going to put in some various specializations, and we're going to allow you to upgrade your gear with your professions. Now, jewel crafting, of course, was an obvious one, although jewel crafting you could upgrade everything. Now, tailoring, I think, is the best example of this. And again, people are split on this. Some people think that the gear you could get by tailoring, the Spellfire, Frozen Shadow Weave, and Primal Mooncloth sets, were overpowered. And some people thought it was the savior of tailoring. Personally, as someone who was wearing them, it was definitely the savior of tailoring. Certainly it was a lot of work, but it gave you a reason to have tailoring. And that's something that they managed with a great number of things. Blacksmithing particularly. Blacksmithing gave you access to unique weapons that you could use and only you could use. And they were good. They were very, very good. The sword was very good. And of course, you all remember the Storm, whatever it is. You all remember the item that I can't remember. Storm Herald, of course, that was what it was. The Stunning Mace. It was very, very good in PvP, particularly in arenas. And there were various professions that offered a great number of cool things, including, of course, later on, engineering got its due with the goggles, which, rather than doing nothing, did an awful lot of damage or healing or protection or whatever else you wanted. They were great items. They were almost best in slot at the time. So it was something of a golden age for self-improvement. And it was an interesting idea. I don't think it quite worked out, but it's certainly a heck of a lot better than Professions in Wrath. Professions in Wrath have just gone down the toilet. I mean, they brought in their brand new baby inscription, which of course people can make hideous amounts of money from via generating Dark Moon cards, and I've seen people sell these cards for like 2,500 gold each. The inscribers on our server are just rolling in it. It's not even funny. We've got a guy who's an inscriber, and he's got a Traveler's Tundra Mammoth and about 50,000 gold just from inscription. It's insane. Whereas I've only just got my epic flying mount. Yes, I did actually get my epic flyer today. Finally! Got my epic flyer and my magnificent flying carpet. But anyway, that's by the by. The problem is, they looked at stuff like Spellfire, and I call it the Spellfire problem, because Spellfire was the most blatantly overpowered set of items that you could make via crafting, more so than anything else. They looked at that and they said, we cannot have this happen again. So, they removed the ability to craft unique tailoring stuff for yourself, BOP, and they made BOE stuff. And the problem is the BOE stuff was outstripped by heroic gear, which meant that spending that amount of resources to make that gear was pointless. It didn't have set bonuses, it was rubbish. It is pretty much all terrible. The only stuff worth having, at least in my opinion, I think was the Ebon Weave gloves, which were about on par with tier 7. Aside from that, the rest of it pretty much sucks. Now, of course, that's killed tailoring as a profession, because what we're supposed to make a profit on, of course. Who knows? Bags? No. Spell thread? No. Too much competition. Can't do that. So, to be honest, regardless of its problems, I would say that the crafting in TBC was better. Now, as regards to story, and this is something I want to quickly wrap up, because I'm not big into the lore, while Burning Crusade was a very interesting place with very varied terrain, and that's something it definitely has over Northrend, the story was threadbare. It wasn't really clear as to what you were there for. You didn't have a grand antagonist. I suppose you did in the form of the Burning Legion, but you weren't really aware of what they were doing. They were around and about, you saw them quite a bit, but it wasn't like Arthas. It's blatantly obvious as you're going through that Arthas has some big plan and that he's constantly trying to impede your progress and getting involved in meddling with your stuff every step of the way. And that is incredibly positive for tying together a unified story that you feel like you're a part of. And of course, phasing really, really helps there. So, I certainly think that's a definite advantage that Wrath has over TBC. TBC was scatterbrained. It felt all over the place, and indeed, the areas were so vastly different that I suppose maybe that was intentional. But it didn't turn out so well. Now, when we come back after the break, I'll be reading some of your emails about the Burning Crusade and going into the idea of TBC rating versus Wrath rating, and indeed versus Classic rating. My name is TotalBiscuit, and you're listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. I've got some testament for you. Yes, indeed, it's Disciples of the Watch. Enjoy. You're listening to the podcast and archive of Blue Please. Music was removed due to copyright concerns. If you'd like to hear the music, tune in live on Fridays at 8 p.m. British Standard Time. That is 3 p.m. EST on WCRadio.com. Yes, indeed, folks. You're tuned in to Blue Please here on WoW Radio with myself, TotalBiscuit. Oh, yeah. We're talking about the Burning Crusade. We're having a bit of a retrospective, putting on our rose-tinted spectacles, as Blizzard seems to think that we always are when we're talking about old content, because, of course, no, nothing could be better than their latest and greatest. It must just all be nostalgia. Not so much. Now, I've been soliciting your opinions on the Burning Crusade. I'm going to read out a few emails before I go into the rating of TBC, which is something I know rather well. Something that I did from the very start of TBC and continue to do so all the way up until Wrath. That's, of course, a lie. I stopped about 9 months before Wrath, but whatever, I did the vast majority of the raid content in there. And, of course, I can wax lyrical about the other stuff that I didn't do, because I'm going to be doing it with Arcanist Belt, who will be starting raiding next week on Saturday, folks. First Zul'Gurub runs. Oh, yeah, we're ready to go. We're rocking. And I've got my Dark Moon card, Maelstrom. Oh, yes. She'll be fun. Now, let me read out a few emails on the subject of the Burning Crusade. Your opinions. If you want to email them in, you can do so. themurloc@gmail.com is the place to go. themurloc@gmail.com. Now, for those archive listeners who are not listening live, I will read some of these out next week as well. So feel free to email in over the course of the week. You can also be involved. Now, let's talk about the Burning Crusade here. Now, here's the first. First email I've got here is from Roxy, and he/she, whoever that may be, says this. Hey TB, having not started TBC at the normal time and only joining the game about 2 months after the expansion release, I missed the whole rush of the first day. However, I leveled my way up fairly quickly and joined a raiding guild. We got to where we got to fairly quickly. 3 out of 4 Tempest Keep, 5 out of 6 SSC, and 2 out of 5 Mount Hyjal. Although everyone has said how epic 40-mans felt, I really enjoyed getting into SSC and TK on raiding night. Not to mention the first night in there was exceptionally fun. Compared it into Wrath, well, I got that same feeling when I stepped into Naxx, but after the first raid my whole attitude had changed. To put it bluntly, and I'm sure that quite a few people will agree, it was boring. Having heard such great things about Naxx in Vanilla WoW, I was really excited, but it was a big letdown. Put alongside the TBC content and would, without hesitation, choose to be raiding TBC content. One of the reasons I joined Arcanist Belt. Yeah. Now, I did go nuts over the whole 40 to 25 man thing, but to be honest, I've got so used to it now that I don't mind as much, and yes, Blizzard did prove that they could design challenging 25 man content. And I will give them their due for that. In TBC, they designed, indeed perhaps overtuned, challenging 25 man content. And that's cool. I will freely admit that I was wrong on that one. It worked out just fine, and I have no issues with 25 man now. However, it has to be said that in my opinion this guy is right. The 25 mans in TBC were better. They were. They were difficult. They were challenging. And there were a lot of them. But we'll come on to that a little bit later on, because I want to read out a few more emails before we go into this. And I've got this one here. Let's have a look. It's from Chris Pazenko, also known as Chaz, and it says this. TBC, in my opinion, was a very good expansion to a point. For the most part, the boss difficulty after the first few tweaks became properly progressive. Kara was annoying, Gruul is harder. At this point, entering SSC, the first couple of bosses were harder than Gruul, but easier than Mag. You kill Mag and get more fights, except Loot Reaver, of course. The last boss of the tiers, i.e. Mag, Gruul, Kael, Vash, Archie, Illidan, and Kil'jaeden, were harder than the instance they entered and harder than the previous tier of bosses. I felt the progression was very good. The only issue was Hyjal, excluding Archimonde. Yeah, Hyjal was actually really easy up until Archimonde, to be honest. Archimonde was a very tricky encounter, the rest of it was mostly joke. If you could beat Anatherin, who was relatively tricky in comparison to the rest, then you could really beat everyone else, and Rage Winterchill was made entirely of loot. The trash in there, of course, was more challenging. Now, He also says this. This is what I liked about TBC, however I don't see that in Wrath. Malagos, the end of tier boss, actually I found easier than some of the bosses in the Heroics. Heroic content is harder than the raid content at some points, i.e. Old Kingdom and Ajnal Narub, especially the achievements. Well, they've nerfed the achievements somewhat, but I would agree that Old Kingdom is kind of tricky, but mostly because of the annoying trash as opposed to the actual bosses. The final boss is kind of hard, especially the achievement, but just taking him down by a nose is not all that tricky. But yeah, I would agree. The sense of progression in Wrath in comparison to TBC is non-existent. Now, I've got some more emails here. That is way too long. I'm afraid I can't read that, so let's have a look at something else. What I thought of TBC, yeah, we'll read that. It says, "Hey TB, Roberta here from Blades Edge EU." It says this, "I was almost as excited as everyone else about the first expansion for WoW. Unlike you, I do like leveling because I get the sense of actual achievement when I leveled back in the day. What I also enjoyed a lot was getting new gear that was vastly superior in stats than the gear I had at the moment. Even though I started to look like a clown in my green, purple, blue, yellow and brown colour scheme, all the colours of the rainbow. Yes, Skittles troll. Another thing I really loved was being able to fly. I still hate Blizzard for removing that up to 77. Oh yeah, don't even get me started on that. What I didn't like about TBC was the fact that it seemed like it was bringing WoW into space, and the Draenei spaceship, Blood Isle space pirates, and of course, the Botanica and the like. Everything looked way too high-tech, but this could be seen as a personal preference. Another thing I didn't like was the fact that TBC was over in about 2 and 3 weeks. Well, no, actually it wasn't. I mean, the leveling time in Wrath versus the leveling time in TBC, I think the leveling time in TBC was actually longer, not by much, but you've got to bear in mind that I know that some people like the leveling content. I know that some people do. But the leveling content, if you have it too long, it's going to piss off more people than it will actually entertain. Forcing people, say, through 20 levels instead of 10 would drive people insane. I mean, I'm the guy that quit 6 times before 60. That's how much I hated leveling. I'm the guy who loves Recruit a Friend because it takes the tedium out of leveling. So, say if it was like 20 levels or it was twice as long, just bear this in mind, I love Warhammer Online in every respect except for one, and that's the leveling, and it made me quit at level 19, halfway through the game. The leveling drove me away. Everything else was awesome, but the leveling sucked, so it drove me away. Anyway. The actual content in TBC, as in the raiding, there was a lot more of it, and it was built around the idea that it was going to have to last for a while, and indeed it had to. It did, and it did last a while. For one reason or another, until, of course, Black Temple and Mount Hyjal were both released in the same patch, which was a nice dose of raiding, I must say, although, of course, it was cleared a little bit too quickly. The TBC content wasn't cleared that fast at all. It took a while, and I was happy with that. And the fact of the matter is that there was a very clear set of progress that you went through. Now, attunements were in there, and I admit, attunements sucked. I campaigned for the removal of attunements, and eventually, of course, they were removed. In my opinion, the only thing stopping somebody from raiding should be their own personal ability. There shouldn't be any kind of artificial barriers in the way. It doesn't serve any practical purpose other than to rooster block people for no apparent reason. If you have properly balanced content, you'll never need attunements. But yeah, in TBC you had clear tiers of raiding. It was very obvious what needed to be done. That also happened in Classic WoW, but since the instances were brought in one at a time, it was a little bit more obvious. It was like a kind of arbitrary sense of progression. In TBC, you had all of this raid content ready to go from the start. You had your first tier of raid content, which was Karazhan and arguably Gruul. You had your second tier of content, which consisted of Magtheridon and SSC and TK. Then you had your third tier of content, which of course came in later, which was Black Temple and Mount Hyjal, and then your tier 4 of content, which was Sunwell. So you had tiers. At least you had tier 1 and at least you had tier 2 there. And you could, of course, further subdivide that down. You went from Karazhan to Gruul. You went from Gruul to Mag. You went from Mag to SSC. And you were sort of doing SSC and TK because there were a couple of loot bosses in both. And you were progressing your way that way. There was plenty of content and it lasted the average guild a good long time. Which I was happy about. Now, as regards to mechanics, you can look at the TBC fights, and some people say, well, the TBC fights were dull. Well, in comparison to what? I mean, we can look at the TBC fights first in comparison to Wrath, before we look at them in comparison to Classic. In comparison to Wrath, you got one instance that was already there in the first place, i.e. Nax. So you're effectively comparing it to a Classic instance there anyway. So let's look at the 3 encounters that weren't in Classic. You got Sartharian, which has an interesting system, which of course was borrowed from, well, arguably borrowed anyway, from AQ40, with the Vem, Kree, and Yauj scenario, the Bug Trio. And indeed, I believe there was something before that that also allowed you to kind of buff up the difficulty. Admittedly, you didn't really get anything for it, but whatever. Saltharian, relatively interesting, but short. Malagos, relatively interesting. I hate the last phase. I think the last phase is terrible. Having vehicles in instances, in raids particularly, is just pointless. I did not sign up to be a rogue. I signed up to be a mage. But no, I'm forced to be a rogue in Phase 3, and it's annoying and fiddly and can just go die. And of course, Vault of Archivon, which shouldn't even be considered a raid. Now, you cannot tell me that the TBC content was inferior to that, because it wasn't. Not at all. Karazhan had a good number of very interesting encounters. Some very original stuff. You had, of course, stuff like the Opera event, which was great. I don't know anyone that didn't like the Opera event. Achumun was a pretty dull boss, but you had Morose, who was relatively interesting. You had the main Virtue, who kind of sucked, but you also had some really cool stuff like, oh, what the hell was his name? Shade of Iran. Very interesting. And of course, the fight at the end with Prince Malchazar was also cool. Netherspite was pretty cool as well. And of course, you had stuff like the chess event. It was a big instance, it had too much trash, and it did become annoying after a while because, of course, a lot of people continued to run it. Particularly because some of its gear was inexplicably better than Gruul and Magtheridon. And I suppose the way that it was designed actually forced you to run Kara quite a lot. Because of the rather linear progression system of TBC, you had to do all those instances, and you had to do a lot of them. Because if you didn't, well, you wouldn't really get very far. Certain gear was required for certain bosses. It was more gear dependent than Wrath, certainly, but that's because Wrath's too easy. It's barely gear dependent at all. There's no gear check encounters in Wrath. Now, let's compare it to Classic. Let's compare some of the meteor instances. Let's have a look at stuff like SSC and TK, and let's compare them to Classic content. Now, Classic content for me only really got going in Blackwing Lair, and even then only about half of the instance was any good. Razorgore was a very, very, very original encounter. It was very good. Veilstrad as well, incredibly challenging. It brought the word DPS race to an entirely new level. A wonderful encounter. Very well put together. Broodlord Lash Lair and the Suppression Room, not so much. Not a big fan of that. And of course then you had the Drakes, one of which was kind of interesting and the other was were really, really dull carbon copies of the other. But it got going again at the end with Chromaggus and Nefarian. Nefarian's still one of my favourite fights in WoW, still one of the most original, a mechanic that's never been reused, and that was the mechanic of class calls. Very good mechanic, very interesting, and a long, epic fight with many phases and many adds left side and even side. Now, you cannot tell me, this is my opinion, my show always is. You can't tell me, at all, that Wrath content was, and is, superior to Nefarian. But is there any TBC content that's kind of on the level of Nefarian? Well, I would say so, yes. I'd say Archimon was on the level of Nefarian, definitely. But that came in later. Was there anything on the level of Nefarian at the start? Well, the answer is yes, actually, there was. Kael'thas is on the level of Nefarian, in complexity and enjoyment. Vash is on the level of Nefarian, in complexity and enjoyment. And there are numerous other encounters that are relatively interesting. Probably not quite on the level there, but as an ending boss, Kael'thas and Vash were absolutely stellar. Admittedly, they were bugged to all hell initially, but once they got fixed, they were very good. And indeed, they were actually killed when they were bugged. Even more impressive there. Very good work from the hardcore guilds. Those encounters rocked. Plain and simple. And the instances grew in potential up until that final moment where you killed that boss. They did. The initial bosses now were quite dull, like Allah. It was alright, but not great. Void Reaver, pretty damn dull, kind of a loot boss. Solarian, not bad, but very easy. And then Kael'thas, and Kael'thas was just a huge step up. SSC was a bit more balanced. It was a better balanced instance because it had more bosses. It ranked up quite nicely. You had Tidewalker, who was very good, but it started with Hydros, who you could skip and go to Lurker, who was the loot boss. But Hydros, very challenging and original encounter. I liked it. Incredibly challenging, still is. Tidewalker, very good. Leothorus the Blind, very good. What's-his-face, whose name I can never remember, the really not-so-great boss. The Big Naga. Not bad. But then, of course, you had Vash, who was stellar. Stunning boss. So many original mechanics. So much challenge. It's wonderful. And things only got better from there on in, of course, with the mighty culmination of Sunwell at the very end, viewed by many as the best instance ever made. Now, I would say that the TBC raid content was at least on par with some of the later stuff in Classic, without a doubt. I mean, AQ40 is one of my favourite instances. Classic Nax was one of my favourite instances, and I suppose people who never did Classic Nax don't really understand what was so good about it, because they took out so many of the really cool mechanics and made it way less challenging. But I would say that SSC and TK, I think people have a jaded view of them because they did them too much. Maybe they have a jaded view of them because they were initially bugged. But I still believe they were great. And I still believe the raiding in TBC was great. And I had more fun raiding TBC than any other time in WoW. Just bear that in mind. That's kind of the whole point, isn't it? That we all have fun. And we're all challenged to play as well as we can. I certainly hope so. My name is TotalBiscuit, and you're listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. When we come back after the break, we'll be talking about what we need from the next expansion. Here's a track for you. I'll be right back after this. You're listening to the podcast and archive of Blue Please. Music was removed due to copyright concerns. If you'd like to hear the music, tune in live on Fridays at 8 p.m. British Standard Time. That is 3 p.m. EST on WCRadio.com. Yes, you are listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio with myself, TotalBiscuit. Yes, indeed. We've been doing the TBC retrospective. We've been looking at various aspects of the Burning Crusade and why it was maligned. We're still trying to work this out, actually. I'm going to read out a few more emails, see if we can find anyone that doesn't like TBC. Right, here's one. It's from Chris Pappas. He says this. What's up, TB? I really like vanilla WoW and TBC. I'm all about raiding. AQ40 and Nax were amazing back then. BT and Sunwell were also really amazing. I don't really pay much attention to professions, but they seem more useful in TBC because the tailoring set would be better than most of the stuff you get from SSC and TK. But overall, TBC was better in my opinion. Progressing in Sunwell was very fun, and I wish that Wrath would do something like that. Can I get a shout out to Moment of Silence on Dalaran US? Yes, you may. Sneaking it in there. Yeah. Evil, evil. What else have we got? A nice little breakdown here. I'm going to read it out just because it's a pretty cool breakdown before we go into the segment about the next expansion and what we must hope that Blizzard will learn from this experience. And it says, hey, TV, this is Daystar from Twisting Nether. I have experienced everything in TBC as a druid, and most of it as a rogue as well. Here are my opinions. Questing was quite boring. Areas were crowded at the start and even a month after release due to the vast number of paladins. However, it was a good thing that zones were able to last you 2 to 3 levels unlike pre-TBC. Yeah, I would agree with that. That's fine. I like the fact that they put in 2 starting zones. That was a very, very smart idea with Northrend content. Very good. I also got to avoid boring tundra. It's like, nothing boring about Borean. Who are you trying to fool? I'll stick with Howling Fjord and the Vikings! And pirates! And ninjas, oh my! Oh yes. That's where I wanted to be, and I enjoyed it very much. Gear was horrible at first when blues were better than Karazhan Epics, or Karazhan Epics were doing better than SSC/TK Epics. Also, the meaning of Epic died since TBC when it was thrown on people instead of making them work for it, not to mention the horrible stat distribution on the tier sets and various other items. Also, the death of the 8-piece sets made me sad. I understand why people didn't like the death of the 8-piece sets. I totally get it. I think it was pretty cool to actually have to choose between getting a set and getting non-tiered items which were generally statted better but lacked the set bonus. I think that was a nice choice to have to make. Now, as regards to gear being horrible at first, well, it was all over the place a little bit. It was overpowered. And yes, there were some Karazhan Epics that were better than SSC TK, but there weren't many by any stretch of the imagination. There was a few examples. I mean, we've got stuff like, say, those Trial Fire trousers, which were better than the pants of the Astromancer. I always felt that the pants of the Astromancer were just badly itemized. Indeed, at that time, there was spell damage, and healing spell damage wasn't the same. They changed that later on. Now, of course, the pants of the Astromancer would be become a very useful kind of healing item, or I suppose druids could probably wear them because they had a lot of spirit on them, but they were badly itemized versus the trial fire trousers, so most people didn't even go for them. I totally get that. Now, crafting. Crafting in TBC was fairly good. It had a meaning. Why would someone choose a certain profession? Well, casters were tailors, warriors, rep paladins were blacksmithing, J-Sing was good for all classes, and healers loved alchemy. However, sometimes it was a must for a certain class to pick a certain profession, because otherwise they would fall behind on gear and thus on damage. I must also say that money making from professions was great. All professions were good for profit. No, they weren't. they really weren't. I'm trying to remember any time when I actually made money from tailoring. Let's see. No, it never actually happened. No, I never made money from tailoring in TBC, and I barely made any money from enchanting either. The enchants at TBC, certainly early on, were pretty nice, but again, it suffered the same problem that Wrath has. Thankfully, later on, there were some rarer enchants, none of which I actually managed to get. Well, not most of them, anyway. But no, I wouldn't say that it was better as a moneymaker by any stretch. I would say that it was certainly more useful, sometimes too much in the case of like Spellfire, but certainly more useful than it is with Wrath. Now, raiding, here's the big bit. He says this. Raiding in TBC was sort of weird. The progress depended on gearing up from a 10-man to be able to progress in 25-mans. It's sort of weird as well to think that you previously had a 40-man guild and then you had to turn it into a 25-man guild. You had to either drop some people, divide up to 3 groups for Karazhan, or recruit some more, which caused some drama. Then there were attunements. Some of them were brutal, like TK and Black Temple. Yes, they were hard. Not going to dispute that. And some of them were fairly okay, like SSC/Hyjal. However, it made recruiting sort of hard sometimes. If you were on Hyjal/BT and you recruited someone without the attunement, you had to do SSC and TK for them to attune them. That made people who had already done SSC TK to death very depressed to go back, and it made like you were carrying the new recruits. What made it worse is how such recruits might be a complete failure, thus after dropping them and getting new ones, and then having to do it all over again. Then about the difficulty, I'd say it was great. It was very hard at the start, then with the release of BT/Hyjal, things got a little bit easier. And then over time it got easier and easier. Then Sunwell was released for the extremely hardcore like me, which I enjoyed a lot. Then came the 30% nerf and new talents that made everything a walk in the park, and allowed lots of Black Temple raiding guilds to clear Sunwell within a week, which was good because other people deserve to see the content provided they are not total retards. Yeah, the end of, I call it the end of expansion bonanza, that. It's like, you can all go see it now, hey. Unfortunately, they seem to have carried that on into Wrath. They seem to have forgot to turn it off. Oh dear. Anyway, he says this, about the reward for raiding, I'd say it was great gear that only works on PvE servers and raids. It was impossible for me to quest or grind with PvE gear, because it meant instant death for another faction. Well, yes, I suppose if you're on a PvP server. Questing was mostly done for me with PvP gear. Oh dear, I'm catching a cold, it's terrible. Add to this, that the PvP gear had the same looks as PvE gear, it made everyone look the same. Well, in comparison to Wrath, I don't see that as being a big deal, because everyone looks the same now. Everyone's got the same tiered gear, and all of the leveling gear and blues have the same models, so everyone looks the same. At least they don't look like Skittles Troll, but they still look the same. The time it takes for raids and progress, he says, was also great. Some bosses required certain gear, which was obtained over time. And apparently he hated the PvP because arenas suck. Yeah, that's quite a nice summary, really, in my opinion. It's not too bad. I agree with most of what's said there. Admittedly, not all of it. I certainly think the TBC raiding was very strong. There were some issues with itemization, and the progression was perhaps a little bit too linear, and I don't agree with attunements. But it was solid content, it was enjoyable content, and it was meaty. It took a while. Always got to have something ahead of you. Always. Must always have a goal. Preferably something that involves killing something very big with a lot of your friends. I'm sorry, but to me, grinding 27,000 gold for a mammoth is not really the most exciting or epic goal in the world. Yes, I did just say epic. Indeed. Now, let's have a little bit of a think. Bearing in mind all that we've just talked about, and bearing in mind the rather glaring flaws with Wrath, what should Blizzard learn from both the TBC and from Wrath of the Lich King going forward? Well, my opinion is this. I think what Blizzard have to realise is that accessibility and difficulty can be independent attributes. giving someone the opportunity to do something does not mean that you should give them the opportunity to walk all over it, or as the new term that's come out seems to describe, face roll over it. Indeed, what tends to happen is that those who wish they could get into raiding finally do, and they are disappointed by the experience. They heard tales. They heard grand legends of guilds full of poop suckers, spending days and days and days and days and weeks and years in raid instances to beat these epic encounters that were so hard that no one else could do them. And then they finally get to do it themselves, and they realise, oh, actually, this is all really easy. And that's not a fair representation of raiding in WoW. In my opinion, Blizzard should be looking at raiding as one of their crowning glories. They made raiding accessible for a good number of people, whereas raiding in other MMOs was for the tiniest minority. And I do mean tiniest. The idea of another game, for instance, I mean, just have a look at the WoW Jutsu numbers before the 30% nerf. We had 4.5 million players who had killed at least one boss in a raid instance in TBC. That's about, at the time, about 40%. Having 40% of people do a raid boss in other MMOs was unthinkable. They were for the hardcore elites. And yes, some of the instances, Sunwell, particularly in Nax 40, yes, they were for the best of the best. But the point is, there was plenty of raiding content for other people, and the progression was linear and obvious, and it worked. Now, removing the attunements was a good step forward. I would agree with it. I campaigned for it, I absolutely agree with it, and I still agree with it. But the difficulty has to be sorted out. Now, this is something that they seem to be doing with Ulduar. They are making many grand promises about Ulduar, and I must say that they're going for broke when it comes to Ulduar. Either it's going to suck horribly, and if that's the case, you're going to hemorrhage players to other games. At least the ones that want some raid content or something more challenging. Or it's going to be a triumph, and it will bring people back into the fold, and we'll forget all of the silliness that's been occurring over the past few months. Now, I would imagine, and certainly hope, that the latter will happen, because, no, I don't really want to quit WoW at all. I'd actually like to play and enjoy it. But enjoying Wrath content at this point is impossible for me. Now, the idea of being all things to all men is something that I don't really like, but when it comes to raiding, they have the opportunity to be most things to most men. And that's okay. You've got 10/25 man versions, and I'm okay with that change. I have no problems with that. However, there are two ways to approach 10/25 man, the segregation between the two. Either you can make them the same difficulty, which involves quite a bit of delicate balancing work. You can make it as difficult for a 10 man as it is difficult for a 25. Now, what that does, of course, is it provides challenge for both 10 and 25 man raiding guilds. Yet, it allows those with access to less people, or perhaps who can't schedule 24 other people to turn up at a specific time, to do the content. Alternatively, you could view 10 as the easy version and 25 as the hard version. Those are two ways that you could do it, but right now, the problem is they seem to be mixing them up a little bit too much. They need to come down on one or the other. Which will it be? Personally, I prefer the former. I really would. Nothing wrong with that. Make it all difficult. Make it all challenging. Now, what they're going to combine in Ulduar with that is the whole idea of hard modes. Introduced with Sartharion, of course, and it was in previous encounters, particularly Vemkri and Yauj. It gives the opportunity for better guilds to gain more loot and take on a higher challenge, and they can choose to do that. That is something they have to push forward with. The next few instances in this game have to have that, and the hard modes have to be hard. The challenges have got to be there, the goals have got to be there, otherwise raiding guilds stagnate. The world firsts have got to be there, the world firsts have got to come back. Nobody cares about everything else. We had world first within 3 days. When Sartharion 3 Drake's kill finally came, nobody cared. There was no hoo-ha, there was no celebration, there was no big ZOMG, the poop sockers. It just didn't happen. We need to see that back. It invigorates the community. It allows them to rally around a group of players and either deride them for it or celebrate their success. It provides for competition. It provides for drive for guilds. That is important. And of course, with the achievement system there is a permanent record of who gets what and when. And special titles and rewards can be given out to those who pull it off first, which is fine by me. That's a good use of the achievement system. The questing system in Wrath is great, and I have no complaints over that. Phasing needs to be used more. I must say, it's a good mechanic. It needs to be used way more, not only in Wrath, but in future expansions. And what they have to really have a look at is the way that professions integrate into the game. Whether or not, what they really want to do with them, because they seem to be at a bit of a loss. They're getting there. They seem to have realised that, yes, you have to take the two aspects of professions. The idea of selling and the idea of improving oneself. You have to be able to do both, perhaps in equal measure. They should have a look at how they did it with TBC, particularly when it came to the idea of improving oneself. Yes, there are improvements to be had. Absolutely. There are upgrades to be had in Wrath, but they were upgrades as opposed to pieces of gear that were actually desirable and BOP. That's the shift that's been made. Now, in my opinion, both should be in there. There shouldn't have been a shift. It's like, right, okay, there's some great BOP gear here, maybe a bit overpowered, might nerf down slightly. Let's add these. Let's add these unique upgrades that you could also have as a profession. And then they need to look back all the way to Classic WoW and through some of TBC and look at the idea of rare items. Items that are difficult to craft, recipes that are difficult to acquire. To give crafters a market to push forward with. It's going to be a tough couple of years, I think, to be honest. I think WoW is going to come up against some real stiff competition. And, of course, it's got a player base that is feeling very, very disillusioned right now. We're hoping, of course, that Old WoW will fix that. I certainly hope. And I do wish Blizzard every success with that. But just remember, telling people that they're looking through rose-tinted spectacles when they look back at your previous content is not only an insult to the people who worked on it, but it's an insult to the intelligence of those who look back and remember those times accurately and objectively. You have to always look back. See where you've been to know where you are. And that's how you improve, and that's how you build on your success. My name is TotalBiscuit, and you're listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. I'll be right back after some synergy with Passage to the Fourth World. Enjoy. You're listening to the podcast, an archive of Blue Please. Music was removed due to copyright concerns. If you'd like to hear the music, tune in live on Fridays at 8 p.m. British Standard Time. That is 3 p.m. EST on WCRadio.com.
Creative, innovative, and cutting edge. If that describes you, you need to listen up now. YouKnowSolutions.com. Get this, programmable LEDs for all your hobbies. You can add a custom kick to all your creations, whether it be display cases, building sets, models, computer case mods, anything you want to light up or customize. The only limit is your creativity. Go to YouKnowSolutions.com today and don't get left in the dark. www.YouKnowSolutions.com.
Yes, indeed, folks. I'm actually rapidly running out of time here, but to be honest, I'm going to go on a little bit longer than usual. Why not? I think you guys deserve it. We, of course, have to deal with one particular feature that is the illusion of choice! Ooh, close one. Almost got me that time. Now, the illusion of choice is where I allow you to choose the final topic of the show every week, and a couple of people have actually been asking me, well, where's Nubcake News? Well, there's a couple of answers to that. Not in my head. As in, you ever heard of writer's block? Well, that happens with me. I'm not a naturally funny person. You might have thought, perhaps, or perhaps been fooled through a careful series of smoke and mirrors, that I'm a amusing person of some repute. Well, that's not true at all. I'm actually not particularly funny. And when it comes to Nubcake News, I can only really write it when I've got a good idea, and I think, to be honest, Wrath has not provided enough ripe parody material just because there isn't enough material, period. And nothing's really been happening with it, so Nubcake News is on hiatus until I think of something funny, and when I do think of something funny, I will put Nubcake News back on the air. The other reason, of course, is that I've been very busy and Nubcake News generally takes quite a little bit of production time. But yes, I do fully intend to bring it back on the air. Now, I've got one thing to say, actually, before I go on to today's Illusion of Choice topic, and that's that a little while ago I posted a movie on the front page. It was called Trees, Things Happen, and it was done by Pink Hair for a competition on machinima.com. And I ended up voice acting 10 separate parts in it, because most of his other voice actors went AWOL, so I ended up filling in rather more than I had anticipated. But I would actually like to announce that we actually won the contest. So, yes, we can have a little bit of applause for that. So, congratulations, Pink Hair, who won himself a Frostmourne, a full-sized, like, $450 replica Frostmourne, and a statue of a bear. Yes, indeed. So, well done to Pink Hair, and I'm glad that I could be of service to you. Also, thank you to the 55,000 WoW Radio listeners that went and had a look at it. I'm not kidding. The views were ridiculous. I have never seen anything quite like it. Just to prove, of course, that the WoW Radio fan base is highly mobile and rather large. Yes, indeed it is. So, thanks, guys. Your support did help very much. Now, let's get on with this. The illusion of choice for this week. I am choosing a topic right now. I'm going to my email box. I'm looking for topics. What can I find? Let us have a look. Well, there is a topic here that I quite like, and it's from Rafsaw of Draenor, and he says this. Oh, he also wants us to give a shout-out / hugs to Harmony. There you go, that's from Rafsaw from Draenor EU, and he says, the illusion of choice topic suggestion. What do you think about the factor of WoW being an esport? As myself, I enjoy watching CS 1.6, WoW and Warcraft 3, but at the moment, the imbalance of classes, making Paladins plus DK always a great combo, makes it a bit silly. Well, Druids were great at 70, but so were Priests, Paladins, and Shamans in certain combos. So do you think Blizz should put more time to balance PvP, remove the big burst damage, and make WoW a more enjoyable esport? Right. Well, I want to break that down, because I don't believe anyone could ever argue against balancing PvP, or indeed balancing anything. Anything that is competitive in some respect or another should be balanced, and I fully support balancing PvP as much as is humanly possible. I think there's always going to be an element where certain combinations are superior to others, but as long as those combinations also have a counter ad infinitum in one giant big loop, you know, it's like rock, scissors, paper, but you've got 20 different kinds of rock, and 20 different kinds of scissors, and 20 grades of paper. As long as it goes around in a kind of circular counter to this counter, which is a counter to this counter kind of thing, then it works alright. However, WoW as an esport I do not agree with, and I never have. Esports are a really contentious issue because some people seem to think that they should work but don't really understand why they don't and why no one cares. Well, gaming is a very popular hobby, but playing, or at least watching other people play games, not so much. I think the idea is that while you can, I don't know, it's difficult, because you could think, well, what's the difference between sports? It's like, well, you can't go and play a sport at that level. Yeah, but you can play the sport, and you can play the game. So why wouldn't watching people at an exceptional level be good for you? Well, as a gamer, I have no interest in watching esports. I have commentated on some. I must say, I've commentated on TCGs, for God's sake. I've commentated on a wide variety of things. I think that gaming as a medium can be entertaining when presented in the correct way, but I don't think esports have really got it nailed down yet. I'm not going to speculate as to why. There is a far better explanation of why if you listen to Octail and Hordak vs. The World, who are on Sundays, and you should go listen to them because they're a great show. They talk about esports quite a lot, and they do so very well, and that's a little bit too general gaming for me. But as WoW is an esport, WoW is too complicated, at least when it comes to PvP. There are too many abilities, and the report on each, i.e. the feedback that you as a viewer get, is not good enough. Think about it this way. You're watching a mock battle. Let's say it's something from one of those LARPs, or maybe it's a war reenactment. Someone gets hit with a sword, and you see them reel back. If someone gets stabbed with a sword, the actual feedback is pretty obvious. Maybe blood will spurt. Maybe he'll fall down and die. However, if you hit someone with a sword in WoW, visually, nothing happens. At all. I mean, it's worse than watching stuff like StarCraft. Because when you go with StarCraft, it's like, I have 5 big tanks. I am firing on these things, they die very fast. It's obvious what a tank shell is going to do to something very small. And indeed, a lot of RTSs are like that. But in WoW, you've got all these bunch of abilities that are not particularly visual. It's like, okay, well, I understand what kick does because I could see the kick, but what about this? I mean, what was that just happened? I have no idea. As a WoW player, I might know what it was, but even then, I haven't played all the classes, and I'm not all that familiar with PvP, so to be honest, I'm not going to be too up on what's going on in a particular fight, and arenas are chaotic as hell. They really are. To me, watching arenas is not interesting. I don't think that WoW will ever be an esport at all. WoW is boring to watch. Project Lore has proved that. Project Lore is an incredibly well-produced series of dungeon run-throughs. It's got a lot of budget behind it, and it's dull as molasses. Assuming molasses are dull. It's certainly slow as molasses, I can guarantee you that. But there is nothing enjoyable at all, no matter how well-produced, about sitting down and watching 4 guys play on computers. I'm sorry, that is not fun to watch. Especially not dungeons. Like, I don't want to see your ugly mugs. At all. I don't want to watch this dungeon be played. It's not entertaining. You know, because I can do it myself. It's like, you don't get good colour commentary. It's like, for instance, like Project Lord, it doesn't do colour commentary. You've got 4 guys playing WoW and talking. It's the same as your guild vent. But you probably do the raids and instances faster than they do, because they're not very good at it. Yes, it's incredibly well produced, but no, it's not entertaining. And I think that really does demonstrate an issue with WoW, even with PvP. A non-WoW player is not going to have a clue what is going on. Whether it comes to PvE or PvP, it's not fun to watch. There's not enough feedback as to what's going on. With some raid encounters, some of them would probably be relatively enjoyable for some people to watch. Stuff that's obvious, like say, let me think. Let me just try and think if there's anything that's particularly obvious. Cthulhu. That will be kind of interesting to watch. Why? Because it's obvious what happens. Because it's got some very interactive and very visual elements. Like, for instance, ice stalks with lasers. Kill things. Okay? Very visual. What about Dark Glare? Very visual. Incredibly visual. The whole eating people with the big tentacle. Very visual. It's a very visual encounter. When things happen in Cthulhu, you can understand why they happen and what their purpose was. But there are other raid encounters where that's not the case, and where the average casual viewer would not understand what is going on. With PvP, I think it's way worse than that. Most casual viewers, including gamers, are not really going to understand what is going on. Whereas in Counter-Strike, you shoot someone in the head, they fall over with a fountain of blood, and it's obvious that you have killed them. Counter-Strike is a relatively simple game to watch. It's like, place the bomb here, see if it explodes. Kill the enemy. That's why it's been somewhat successful, although not entirely so, as an e-sport. And you can clearly recognise what is skillful. You can recognise solid team tactics. It's very visual in that respect. If you flank somebody and you shoot 3 guys in the head and you're watching that, it's like, yeah, that's cool. I understand what happened there. I might not be as good as him, and I might not understand what exactly he did, but I understand what happened and why it happened, and it was visual. And that was important. But in WoW, that's not the case. If something cool like that happens in WoW, most players don't even know how or why it happened. Because it's like, hey, there's a bunch of effects going off, but I don't understand what's going on. It's a confusing mess of melee. Not good. Not good at all. It's too disorganized, it's too random. I think that Blizzard needs to stop putting this kind of idea forward. The only thing, I suppose the only benefit of for them desperately pushing it towards being an esport is that they will try and balance the damn thing. And if that's their motivation for balancing it, then all the better. But I prefer their motivation for balancing it be that it be balanced. I mean, that should be a reward in and of itself. You should always aim to balance your game. So no, I don't think that arenas will ever become an esport. I certainly hope they're not an esport, because if that's the future of esports, then good lord, I'm not going to be watching many of them. They're not interesting to watch, they're not fun, and they're way too niche. Beyond what the even niche aspect of esports are. Way beyond that. To the point where barely anyone is interested. That's not profitable, that's not entertaining, it's never going to break into the mainstream, it's never even going to break into the niche mainstream. It's just too obscure, and it's just not fun to watch. Now, I've got a couple of minutes left in the show, folks, so if you want to shout out, then now will be the time to do it. Send it in. Oh yes, send it in to themurloc@gmail.com. That is themurloc@gmail.com if you want a shout-out on the show. And you can have it. Not a question about that. I'm going to give a couple of shout-outs first. People that have stuck them in early. I've got one here. Shout out to a sick guildie. This one's from Lacrosse, and he says, shout out to our token Fury warrior, Haltaf of Arthas US, who just had his appendix removed. Get well soon, so you can get back to easy content. Yes, indeed. Get well soon. You have removed the appendix. We must remove the appendix. There is a pigeon in your stomach. Ayamo says, the weekly shout-out to Arcanist Belt. Oh yes, shout-out to Arcanist Belt. We'll be raiding soon, yeah! We are the ultimate level 60 guild. Oh yes. We will prove it. You know, it's going to provide some great content. I said I will eat my hat if I go back into Blackwing Land Beyond and realise, actually, I was just looking at it through rose-tinted spectacles. I do genuinely believe that it is better content than Wrath content, and I intend to prove it by doing it. Oh yes. Another shout-out to Arcanist Belt from Ariana, who has 4 level 60s. 4 level 60s! It's ridiculous! I've never seen anything like it. This woman is insane. She's incredibly good at what she does, but good lord! A shout out to the Arcanist Belt BRD group. We did a full clear of Gnome. We're going to now a full clearing this place. Good lord, we are insane. That's from Eurofan. More shout outs to Arcanist Belt. Shout out to Arcanist Belt from Alif. Is he a wrestler druid? He better be with a name like that. I'll be back next week. Please don't kick me. Okay. A shout out to Exalterigo, Free Candy Guild, Laughing Skull US. Just started a full guild runs of 25-man knacks. Enjoy the week's worth of content that will provide you. A shout out to all my guild mates at the Fremen Knights on Archimond. No shout out, I just wanted to say, haha, I've given you a shout out now, Tarajo. You can't escape me. I realise your plan. Trying to sneak a compliment in there. Not gonna happen. So a shout out to Tarajo for his boot licking. Well done. A shout out to Angelina. Is that Angelina? Possibly. Angelana. I don't know. Level 73 Night Elf Druid on Blade Fist EU from her loving boyfriend Ajaria. Aww. That was inappropriate. What else have we got? A shout out to Arcanist Belt from Koi. A shout out to Dark Herring from Ymir. Dark Herring is great. I'm sorry. The Dark Herring item is great. I want to dual wield those things. Shout out to Dark Herring from Ymir. Twisting Leather US. I will get you. I have no idea what that is. YoTB Ragavali here. Can I get a shout out to Fjorda, Typharis, what is that? I don't know what that is. And everyone in Arcanist Belt. Shout out to Carco and Hollow Point on Rune Totem EU Enhancement Shaman's Rock. And one last shout out before I go off the air for tonight. And thank you ever so much for listening, guys. Really. Oh, yeah, Ariana's got a level 30 Hunter and a level 39 Warlock. Oh, good lord. Can I get a shout out to the Casually Hardcore crew, all non-entitled casuals? Put your hands in the air. Wave them all around like you just don't care, when you don't care because you have a real life. I don't care. Something like that. I'm out here, folks. My name's been TotalBiscuit. You'll be listening to the one and only Blue Please on WoW Radio. Check out our other shows at WCURadio.com. You can subscribe to us via our website or via iTunes. Our archives are made available on our site, so you can stream them via Flash or download them via MP3 and put them on whatever the heck you like. WoW Radio is run via advertisements and your kind donations, so feel free to donate at the link on WCURadio.com. It's the bottom left hand of the nav bar there. You'll see a donation link. Alternatively, donate via PayPal to WoWRadioDonations@gmail.com. That is WoWRadioDonations@gmail.com, so we can continue to provide you with this content. All of our crew are volunteers and very much appreciate the opportunity to do shows for you. Thank you for listening, folks. I've been TotalBiscuit. Good night. You have been listening to the podcast and archive of Blue Please, a show that airs exclusively on WCRadio.com on Fridays at 8 p.m. British Standard Time. That's 3 p.m. EST. You can check out our archives on our website at WCRadio.com and subscribe to our RSS feeds. Don't forget to rate and review us using iTunes, and if you wish to leave constructive criticism, that is always appreciated. Head over to WCRadio.com/forum and post in the threads there. Thank you for listening.